Welcome to 132 Problems Revisiting Mormon Polygamy, where we explore the scriptural and theological case for plural marriage. I am so excited to bring to you the second episode in this series on helping us understand the actual experience of polygamy. I think we have to see this part of it to really understand what it is and where it comes from. Tonia Tewell is an amazing human who I'm so excited to have gotten to know and to let all of you get to know. Also, I think that it's really important to understand the direction that polygamy is going and the problems are going. It's not what I wanted to hear. And also, please stick around to the end so you can learn some ways that you can help for anyone who feels inspired to. First of all, I just want to ask everyone to start praying for our brothers and sisters that are still trapped in this awful system. I have to give the caveat. I know that this is a little bit of a controversial title because not everybody in polygamy feels like a victim or feels like they are victimized. I acknowledge that. I understand it. But there are many, many who do. And they need God's help and they need our help. And we need God's help to know how to start to fix these terrible problems that are still existing in our communities. So thank you so much for joining us as we take this next deep dive into the actual experience of plural marriage. Welcome to this episode of 132 Problems. I am so happy to be here with Tonia Tewell, who is just a gem that I am so excited to meet and connect with, and the work that she is doing and has been doing in our community is amazing and so critical and essential. So Tanya is the founder and executive director of Holding Out Help for Families, which, I've read a little bit on the website and I'll let you tell us about it, but I know that what its main purpose is to help people, children and women, and I believe also men who are coming out of polygamy and trying to acclimate and learn how in the world to live in this world that they have been so sheltered from. So Tanya, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And can you correct anything that I left out of your introduction?
You did actually really well. I was going to say, I don't know if I can do it much better. So no, it was great, Michelle. We started this 15 years ago, just seeing a need in our community in our backyard here in Utah. And so we provide all the necessary resources for somebody who's transitioning out of the culture. We do help people who are still in as well, but we specialize in those who are shifting out and don't really have any idea on how to navigate mainstream society. And so we just felt we needed to do something a little bit more.
Okay, so we're going to go so many directions. I have so many questions for you. But first of all, I would love to, and I have things that I've said in and a past episode that I'm going to have you, that I was happy to have you correct me on. So we have a lot to talk about. But first, you are not and have never been a member of the LDS Church. Is that correct?
That's correct. No, I'm not from here. So I'm from Nebraska, even though I've lived here, gosh, I want to say 25 years. And so I'm a Christian, but just not part of the LDS Church. And so, yeah, no, I'm not. And it's funny because I listened to a couple of your podcasts over the weekend, just trying to get a feel of who you were. And I was very fascinated and really related to you on the topic of truth and love. And so I love what you're saying. I don't know all the ins and outs of the doctrine and covenants that you know on the LDS side, so I don't have the same opinions, but I just loved that connection that we have. I ask so many questions in my church that if they wouldn't ask, I wouldn't be a part of. So I really respect you for that.
Oh, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. What I think I love is, so I've done a lot of study into early Utah. I did some episodes on the early women of Utah who also were non-members who were helping the polygamist women, clear back with Jenny Anderson Froiseth. So I find it fascinating that we have this long tradition of good Christian women seeing a need kind of from the outside and coming in to help. And so I kind of love that connection that you are really in the footsteps of Jenny Anderson Froiseth doing the same work, which I think is beautiful.
I don't even know who she is, so I'm going to have to look that up. You're going to have to text me her name because I've heard some of others in the past, but I have not heard of Jenny. And so no, it was interesting because when my husband and I were moving here, I had followed him all over with his corporate job. And I remember him saying, you know what, we're being transferred to Salt Lake City. And I was like, that's the one place I will not go. I don't want to go. I heard there's polygamy there. And then I would joke around with him, like, you're going to take another wife. And he's like, and so we would laugh about it. And then we land here. And I guess we didn't realize how prevalent it was. Like, there's so many here. And I think they do a good job of just keeping on the outside and not letting people really know they're around. But when we learned more, we just had to do something. So
Yeah, and I want to hear that story. Growing up in Salt Lake, it's interesting because I think it's so separated from us in the mainstream LDS church that, like you'd be somewhere and you'd see the people in their dresses with their braids and be very aware. Oh, and it was just so strange that we didn't know how, they definitely didn't want to interact with us. And I didn't, like, I remember being ice skating one time at a birthday party and seeing a man sitting up with his two wives high up, and that was maybe the first polygamist I had ever seen. Just I was like, that's so weird, and so I guess growing up in it was not in it. I mean, growing up and seeing it occasionally, it was very separated, very distant, and very strange, and I didn't have the awareness that I needed to or could help. Does that make sense? So I think it's beautiful to bring kind of your fresh eyes as an adult to this, to be able to see it in ways that I didn't see it growing up here.
well, and you said that very well. Like, it's not really anybody's fault that more hasn't been done because they do isolate themselves and nobody is aware. The only reason I am privileged now to understand how vast it is in Utah is because I'm in the thick of it day in and day out. Otherwise, I wouldn't know either. And it was somebody, I think I was here probably 10 years. And by the way, I love Utah. You're never getting me out of here. It's my home now. But I was here probably 10 years when the first family landed on our doorstep. And we're like, wow, this really does exist, because it was out of sight, out of mind. Really didn't think that, it was going on as I was told in the past. And so it was just a real shocker to find out that there's so many. And a lot of them dress just like you and I dress. Like, it's, we know it's the ones with the flig hair and the dresses, but a lot of them are just like you and I and just living around us in our neighborhoods. And you wouldn't know it unless you hear this podcast, because hopefully by the end I'll educate everybody a little bit more. So
Right, right. That's what I learned as an adult. I've told this story before, that my mom is a children's music composer, and her music would be sold in homes. So I would go do parties, and that's how I got into the polygamist communities as an adult, because a lot of the polygamists were raising their children the way I was raising my children, and we had a lot of connection, a lot in common. And I would go into their homes and show them the music, and they explained to me their theology, how they made the connections with the LDS Church, and how they believed they were called to be separate for a time to keep this principle on the earth that had been revealed, never to be removed. And for me, as a young LDS mom, I was like, oh, that completely makes sense. That's beautiful. And you guys are raising your family the way I want to raise my family. And I really gained I have shared before that my grandmother was the oldest daughter of post-manifesto polygamists, but fully active in the church. So it's rather close to me, and I was raised with a testimony of it, and then having those confirmations as an adult, and then getting into seeing a little bit more of how prevalent it was, because those women I became friends with did just dress just like me, except maybe long sleeves instead of short sleeves, but you would never know.
Were they part of a group, or were they more so people need to know there's like 15,000 independents, which
yeah,
where we work, their kids go to the same schools, they're in the same grocery stores and
right.
shop. You wouldn't know any different. I mean, they're just like us. And so do you know if they
right. Yeah, so the women, the one girl who really became my friend, we spent some time together, she was in the All Red group, and I think that most of them were. But the other thing is, there's a lot of intermingling between groups as well. Yeah. There's a lot of and so people will break off and kind of form their own group, or a lot of people come to it on their own, like get into the old Brigham Young sermons and become converted and start living it on their own without a group. So so they tend to sometimes know each other, from my understanding, but they're not necessarily. Yeah, it's really an interesting sort of. I don't want to call it underworld in a demeaning way, but it is kind of an underworld that we're not really aware of, that's
absolutely
going on.
Absolutely. And I think the people who watch this podcast need to know they're kind, they're loving, they're God-fearing, right? It's not that they're different from you and I. I think where we see some of the devastation piece of this is just the system that they're actually under, right? And these closed, environments and some of the teachings that they have. But I mean, they're just like you and I. And people are always like, what do we do? What do we say if we see them in the store? I'm like, just treat them like you would anyone else and say
A
hi.
smile goes a long way. A smile
Yes.
goes. Sometimes they can be very stern and standoffish, and not want, like, they've been. Many of them have been scared, trained to be scared of the outside world, and very judgmental and hateful toward the outside world as well. But many of them, like I guess polygamists are just as different as individuals and groups as any of the rest of us, right? And so,
Right.
so some of them I think are like, honestly, some of the most beautiful humans. Some of the people I've met are gentle and loving and striving. And then I just did an interview with Flora Jessup, and she sees a much darker side of it, particularly the closed societies where things are not resolved. And, abuse has a way of just twisting people into abusers. And so there definitely can be this really dark side with a lot of people, and these levels of control. But it's not like every polygamist husband some of them are like really good guys trying their best to do under an
Yeah.
impossible system. And
We
many of these women are the same.
absolutely. And we took in our family. So when we started this, we had an email that came in and said, would you be a safe house for people leaving polygamy? We happened to say yes. And our house was packed for 3 years straight, never had a break. And one of the families that came in was a husband and a wife and all of their children. I think there was like 7 children at that time. And then they had another one later, but he was the kindest, most caring man. And I remember, so we have a Rambler. And so the polygamists live in our basement and we live upstairs. We have a divide and then we share all the outside space. This is in the past, we don't now, but it was interesting because I came downstairs just to knock on the door and just to they were new. They didn't know me very well, just to make sure they were doing okay. And I hear, come in. And so I opened this door and I mean, I could have cried, Michelle, because there he is. I think he was reading the Bible or the Book of Mormon. I'm not sure which. And all of his children, one of them was maybe 18 months old, were all gathered around their father. I mean, looking up with just awe. And he turns around and he gives me this grin. And of course, I'm like, don't cry. He's going to think I'm weird. I was ready just to weep. And when he gets done, he kind of stands up and he said, Tanya, he said, thank you. And I said, for what? And he said, I've never been allowed to be a father. And now I get to be a father and I get to watch my kids grow up. And I got to watch the first steps of my little boy. And he said, I just can't thank you enough for taking us in. And so he was still in love with his first wife. So he had 2 wives. And it was interesting because they both wanted the first wife to also be a part of their family. And we knew she was struggling too in there. And so we sent a gift basket with love notes tucked underneath. And we had someone deliver it to her house down in Colorado City. And I guess she opens the door and they said, this is from, I'll make up the names here. I'm not going to say real names, but like Joe and Susie. And she just cried and cried and cried. But she was on the list to be married to Warren Jeffs when he got out of prison. So they were going to take his first wife from him and reassigned to Warren Jeffs. And she was like, I'm supposed to stay in. So she never left. But he was a great, great man. And I think that they lived with us for a full year. And it was so interesting because we would come home and our house got kind of run down with, all the people living in it. We just didn't have time to keep up. And he was always out fixing things. Okay, there's a squeak in the door. So he's fixing the door. And there was one of our doorways where they went in and out of, they had their own entrance and exit. And the doorway was kind of falling apart. And so he got this foam stuff and he just foamed the whole thing. And I thought, well, we're just going to deal with the foam for now. Like what our neighbors thought. We're like, it's okay. We'll replace it later on because we wanted them to relax and just be kids. But he was so kind and just fixed up our house any way he possibly could to give back. I mean, who does that, right? He was a gentle.
That's beautiful.
So I want people to hear the other side. Everyone thinks the men are mean and, nasty. And, they're on the same treadmill that these women are on, right? They're on the same treadmill. they can't get off of. So
That's what I really try to keep the focus on. It's the father of lies is the villain here, right? It's not the people that are the villains. It's the bad ideas that are the villains and that people are stuck in, and that's, the people are just people like us, and like we can just be thankful that we aren't stuck in that dishonest system and that falsehood that they
yeah.
are, because it does not serve people well. It
That's
just
why,
doesn't.
but that's why, Michelle, it's so important when you said earlier, like they're taught that outsiders are evil and going to use them up immediately. They usually say within a week you're going to be used up, raped, whatever that is. And so it's so important for us to show them that it's something different. So a simple smile, or gosh, they're $5 short at when they're checking out and someone just slips it, whatever that is. Or you might have a neighbor that, again, you finally realize. So, for example, let me give you an example so you know what I'm talking about. So the Kingston polygamist group, they dress like we dress. And so they're living in normal neighborhoods, kind of representing themselves as single moms. They have a lot of kids, but they won't come to the neighborhood barbecues. They're not going to sit and hang out and chat with you. But what difference does it make when you bring over a thing of cookies, or you realize that the kids, they might not be having the nutrition that they need, drop an empty, not an empty, but an unidentified box of food, not saying who it's from, just little things to show that the outside world is not what they were taught, right? We're in one of the most giving states, philanthropic, I don't know how to say that word, state that we could ever be.
Philanthropic. Yeah.
Thank you. Philanthropic state that we could ever be in. You can cut that part out. But I mean, we're an amazing state, and they need to see that people out here are loving and kind and caring, and they don't care if they're from polygamy or not, right? We need to show them another side. So,
Oh, I love that so much. That's one of the things that I love about our people is I feel like I've been taught to just pray every morning, Lord, how can you use me today? What do you want me to do today? And as soon as we plug in a mindfulness of, Lord, are there people in this system that are suffering or struggling that I can help, that I can bless? And, I think like if we just add that awareness to our prayers, I think it's amazing what the Lord can do with us.
it's interesting because those are my same prayers in the morning. How can you use
Yeah.
today? How can you use this soul that I know is not the best all the time, but I'm willing, and with you I can do anything, right? So same
Yes.
prayer, same prayer.
I know, I love that. And so I guess I just wanted to add the polygamous piece for the rest of us who have lived here our whole lives and not been as aware. So I want to know how you got started. How did you get that email and that first family showing up on your porch, and what, so you were out of the state and had a perception of Utah that there was polygamy, and then moved here and lived here for 10 years. And then
Yeah, and then it was strange because some lady had walked into the church that I go to and had asked one of the pastors, hey, is there anybody here that would be willing to be a safe house? And I had been, there's a larger story behind it why I do what I do, but I had been dealing with cancer. And so we moved in this larger house to have a live-in to help me and my children. And I was doing really good at the time. And so we had this whole basement that we didn't need, we didn't use. And so our family responded and said we would be willing. And it wasn't until probably about, I want to say a year and a half maybe, where we got the call that said, we have this family who is going to be coming to your home on a Saturday. And it was a family of 6, 2 adult women, 4 children. And so we were preparing for Saturday. And then we got the call Tuesday prior where this gentleman was going to kind of scout out where she lived. She's from the All Red group, by the way. And he was driving by her house. And when he drove by the house, he saw the husband that was trying to get in the doorway. I guess he had come home from a trip early, and the mother was in the master bedroom just waiting for anybody who was driving by to help her. And so he's like, oh my gosh, I just think it's such a godsend that he was just driving by to check it out for that Saturday. And so he was smart enough to call the police, and the police showed up and they held the husband at bay. But that, of course, the house was in his name. And so the wife didn't have any rights to be there. And so she wasn't legally married to him. She was a spiritual wife. I think she was number 4 in his home. And so he just said, gather what you need, and I will make sure you get away peacefully, but you have to leave the property, essentially. And so she threw the kids' clothes in garbage bags, and thank goodness those children were at, I don't know if it was a friend or a neighbor's house. The father didn't know where they were, so she packed up her van. She was a teacher by trade, so she packed up some books and drove to get her kids and was leaving her community. And she says, I just remember, she's very stoic. And I just remember her saying that tears just started flowing, out of my eyes. And she said, I just realized I walked away from everything and everyone I'd ever known. I lost my friends, my family, my entire social structure. She had walked away probably from her religion, she realized at that point, and she was landing on strangers. We had never talked to her, landed on strangers' doorstep, taking a chance and a risk that we were going to be a safe place to land. Like we could have harmed them, and so she lands with the 4 children. Her mother came later, but at probably 10:30 at night, we were frantically, whipping up beds and, oh my gosh, they're coming. And I remember her wrapping her arms around me, and she whispered in my ear that she told the kids they were on, I don't remember if she said a journey. She didn't say the word vacation, but a journey. And I was like, okay. And I'm thinking, what does that mean? And so we put them in the basement, and the kids were all happy to be there. So they weren't scared because they hadn't dealt with what she dealt with on the back end. She was such a good mom, the way she protected her children. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'm entertaining. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. And I was like, I have time. I'm just like, do I have enough money to do what I think that they need? And came to realize that they didn't really have a lot of toys. They didn't have, so they were glad with my swing set and my trampoline out back. They thought they had landed at a resort. And I mean, my bikes and my scooters, and they would just ride all day with my kids. And my kids were in the same age range as their kids. Like, it was the most beautiful situation. And then her mom landed, who left the same night from her husband later on that evening. And they were more educated than I've ever seen since. So they had come, well, I'll just say, I should be careful what I say. I don't want to point out who they are, but where they came from and landed, I think she was like probably 10 or 11. They came from another place, I'll just say, another state that they landed, and they wanted to marry everybody into polygamy. And I don't remember my point behind that, other than, she was essentially told that this is the only way for you to live in order to be able to reach the celestial kingdom, in order to be in the presence of God. And so she did what she was told, but that her father, when he met her husband, said, you have to promise to get her educated. That's the only thing I'm asking of you, is to make sure she's educated. So she did get her, I believe, her bachelor's degree when she landed with us. Her and her mom decided to go back and get their master's, and they're actually very prominent members in our community, but don't want people necessarily to know, because they fear the judgment of society, which can happen. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful story. So their kids are all raised; they're doing great.
Okay.
Well,
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, and I think you asked me how we got started. And from that point on, our house was packed with, like, we were like, well, we have this home, we have this space, I'm doing well. So, I mean, we just kept taking in families. But that first family sat my husband and I down one night, and they just said, would you guys be willing to start a nonprofit? There is no safe place for us to land here in Utah. And I said, why us? Like, what, give us, behind the scene. And she said the people that showed up which were neighbors, people that we knew in business, our church family members. It was every walk of life that stepped up and dropped things off, whether it was clothes, whether it was cleaning supplies, whether it was food, to help support this family. And she said, what we felt was so different from where we came from, because people were serving us, but they had zero expectations of us. And so I said, that's called unconditional love. And she said, yes, it is. And she said, that is the type of organization that we need. And so really at that point, again, 10 years of a stay-at-home mom, I was in banking and finance prior. And I remember patting my husband on the back going, babe, you're going to be great at this. I mean, he's a corporate guy. And he's like, honey, I've got a wife that's sick off and on. I've got 3 kids, and I'm working, 80 hours a week, trying to provide. He's like, I don't have time to do this. And so I remember thinking, I don't have the ability. Like I was terrified of failure. And with my history and my past, very insecure. And I thought, there's no way. And I thought, but God can do it, even if I can't. And so we decided to open just up our home, being a tiny, small nonprofit. And we did get our 501c3, and it kind of took on a life of its own. So the first year we had 30 people. The next year it was 60 people. The next year it was 120. And we were like, okay, we've got to do something because we're drowning. And so we just reached out to community members, and it took on a life of its own. And here we are 15 years later. So it's kind of cool. We now serve anywhere between 150 to 250 people per year. So
That's amazing. That's amazing. Okay, it's such a beautiful story. I think one other thing I want to add to the story of the woman coming to you and anyone coming out of polygamy, it's not even just leaving their religious community, because I think in polygamy, from my understanding, there's much more of a negative religious idea of like you're going to hell. It's not just you won't be exalted, but you'll be in the celestial, you'll be in a beautiful place. It's you're going to hell if you don't obey everything we tell you to. And so the existential terror isn't even just for losing every single familiar thing in this life. It carries on to eternity as well. And I think that's hard to even comprehend what these people experience.
it is, they come out, and when you come from a closed society where essentially most decisions are made from you, right? You really don't own anything. You don't even have a bank account, right? The money is distributed the way the leaders see fit. And they come out and you think, oh, this is all the physical things that they need. But the worst thing they deal with is the mental bondage from where they come from, because they are told, they believe when they land on my doorstep, they know they're going to hell or outer darkness. It's that simple. And so the hope is so low. And that is why it is so important the way we set up our agency to just meet them as humans and care for them as human beings, whether they believe my way or your way or not, right? Like, okay, so what can we do to get you from point A to point B? And the biggest piece is dealing with first the basic necessities, which is food, clothing, shelter, and safety. You cannot move forward until you settle that nervous system down and know that their basic needs are met. And then, the mental bondage, we have 2 counselors, we have 2 neurofeedback clinicians, not going to go into detail what that is. We need a third one. We have 23 people on the wait list. It's horrific. And the reason it's horrific is because it's the difference between life and death, right? They're landing, they're certain they're going to hell. So why would I want to remain here? And they're suicidal quite often. And so getting them into counseling, if they're willing, we don't force it. They're taught that counselors are evil and they're going to brainwash them against their community and their people and their faith. And so they're really terrified of that. And so it's just kind of a slow, when they usually come in to do an intake, usually at that point, I'll put a little bug in one of the counselor's ear and say, hey, could you just come in and introduce yourself? And just that first interaction just makes them relax and go, wow, she's really nice. And then I say, yeah, she's one of our counselors here. So if you ever need to talk or you're having intense anxiety or, whatever it is you're dealing with, it's a safe place where you're not going to be judged. She's never going to share information outside of that room, not even with us. And you can talk about anything. And they're like, okay, maybe I should try it. And I'm like, if you try it, just do one session. If you don't like it, you don't have to go back. And so it is so important with what we do that we give them that voice. They've never had that voice, right? And so they get to say yes, and it's okay to say no. Where they come from, it's not okay to say no. There are severe repercussions if you say no. You could lose your family, you could lose your community, you could be condemned to hell. And so it's so much bigger, and I don't even know where to take it from there, but it's so much bigger than any of us can imagine. And that's why it takes our entire community of people out here to understand that and to step up alongside and support these folks.
Oh, wow. I love how you talk about that, because really building the trust, there's so much fear, so much fear and suspicion and distrust. So letting them have that voice is powerful. The last thing I need is to be told what to do again.
Yes.
Right. And I love how you're talking about that, because also letting her learn what unconditional love is, because that's something that most of them never experience either. It is so conditional. Even the love of God is conditional in their understanding.
Yes. You're absolutely right. You know, we have something called host homes, and these host homes are families like yours and mine. We used to get a lot of kids dumped. So a lot of mine are children, and the parents would sign over rights, or we'd go to court and get guardianship. And it was interesting because early on, I didn't know what I didn't know either, right? So I'm sure I made every mistake you could make in the book. And it's how I've grown to where we are today. But one of the host families called, and they had a little kid, I want to say 14, 15 years old, that they were raising as their own. And they would walk alongside him and they would say, you know, every time we sit down to have kind of a family meeting on, you know, what's working and what's not. And they say the kid just kind of goes into fetal position and shuts down. And I'm like, huh, okay, well, tell me, like, what are your dialogues about? And she would explain. It was nothing scary that would happen to us. Okay, great, your chores weren't being done. So what are the ramifications going to be if you don't get your chores done? And so I said, all right. I said, do you mind if I pick them up and take them out for lunch? And I can always get them to talk over food. It is the craziest thing. And I wonder if it's because it was so structured in there. And so I took this young man out for a burger, and I had a pretty good relationship with him. And I said, you got to tell me, like, what is going on in, you know, this family and why you shut down when they're having a family meeting. And he said, well, Tanya, that's called a correction where I come from. And I was like, okay, talk to me a little bit more about what these corrections are. He said, when you sit down face to face with someone, you're getting corrected, and afterwards you get a severe beating. And so they tell you what you've done wrong, and then they beat you into submission. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I tried to explain to the family, when you're having a dialogue, take them for a drive in a car so you're side by side. Don't, you know, look head on. Or shoot baskets, or go on a hike or a walk side by side. But one of the other things is they were so frustrated because the kids always said, I don't know. Every time they'd ask him something, he'd say, I don't know. And they took it as disrespect, like he's being disrespectful and refusing to respond. Well, what we learned was he was not being disrespectful. He legitimately did not know. And so I would teach these homes that you're like, hey, do you want steak or chicken? And he's like, I don't know. You give him a piece of each. And then you watch him eat it. And then you say, so tell me, which one did you like better? Again, giving them their voice back, because they've known. And then I tell them, if he comes to you, because he's going to naturally want you to make his decisions, because that's all he knows. And so if he comes to you and says, gosh, do I want to play soccer, or do I want to play basketball in school? You sit down with him and do the pros and cons list of each. You let him make the decision, and you back him 100%, and let him deal with the natural consequences of life, like we've taught our children since they were young kids. And so it's just, there's so many nuances dealing with this community that, again, I'm sure I've made every mistake in the book, but and I don't consider myself an expert in this field by any means, but we've learned a lot. And that's why I think it's so important when people get, like, we've had a lot of people, families call us and go, somebody dropped this kid off and we decided to take him in, and it's like an alien in our home, and we don't know what to do. And we're like, we've got you. We'll walk alongside of you. We understand all these nuances that this child is going through. So there's just so much to this. We could go on for hours, Michelle.
Okay. I love hearing you talk about it, because it's so helpful. And I love even you saying I've made every mistake in the book. I'm just thinking, well, that's parenting, right? Like we're doing, but look at how much good you're doing. So I love the fact that you don't have to be the perfect you don't have to be perfect to be a parent, and you don't have to be perfect to step in and help and be an angel to some of these people. I am curious to know how your children did, because that can be hard to have a bunch of very different kids in their space, on their trampoline, in their home, taking their mom's attention. How was that ever a struggle?
Absolutely. I would, be a fool to say no. So my children loved it, and they were super little when we started it, first off, is what you need to know. And when we got the first family and the kids were between the same age ranges, I mean, our community was the one, while the mom was at work, we went to pick up the kids from their schools, and we did after school play dates, or we'd go down to the swimming pool, or whatever. And the kids loved it because they had so many friends. And you'll hear this with polygamous families. They loved their childhood because there was always somebody to play with, right? And so that was good. As they got older, and I think they came to the realization of the, I'll just say, the safety issues that went around with what mom and dad did. right? I mean, these leaders would love to see me killed and off the face of this planet. Um, when
Oh,
when the
let me pause on that for a minute, if that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
That's a big statement you just threw out there. Like you, this like beautiful human doing all of this good, and the control mechanism does not want an escape for the people. That's why I think, the early church, Brigham Young, came to Utah, thousands of miles of hostile wilderness, to be able to have strict control. And that's, like you being a way out for these people. What have you experienced in threats, and what have you had to do to protect yourself?
yeah, that's a good question. So we've been followed. I intercepted blogs where they found my children, where they went to school. And so we would have to have sorry, I'm going to cry just because the way I affected my kids. And so we had to go to the school. We were at a small little Christian school, and we had to say, you've got to walk my kids to and from. When we drop the kids off, they can't be outside alone. You've got to get better protections in the school. And they were so great. They got gates, they got cameras, they got a security system to go in and out. And so there was a lot of that. And when you hit my kids, you hit them almost hard, as you can
Oh,
imagine. And so, we haven't really, so we learned, and here's what we learned a little bit later, but that helped us a ton, is that they are terrified to be on video. And so my home's a fortress. And so we have cameras everywhere. The location where we're at, our main hub, cameras everywhere. Our other locations where we have housing, for clients, we have cameras. And so we had to learn very early on. But in the meantime, there was times where a threat came in that said you have 24 hours before we take you out. And because they didn't use the word kill, or that, the Draper police, I live in Draper, were very aware. But because they didn't use certain terminology, and we weren't sure who was on the other end of the phone, because they use burner phones, we slept, with guns under our pillows, and, made sure kids were tucked in and everything was locked. And we wouldn't always tell them that there was something that could be coming down the pipeline, because we didn't want our kids to live in fear. But they're not dumb when you say, hey, by the way, the teachers need to walk you out to mom's car. And by the way, mom needs to walk you in every day. They sense, they pick it up. But, outside of that, I think God is so gracious, Michelle, because one of the very first cases we had was with the Kingston polygamist group, and it was one of the leader's daughters. And well, it was the leader's daughter. And we had this big,
ooh.
I know it was, and I didn't know what I was doing, again, completely naive. And so I was relying on the state
I
of
just know how much the Kingstons in particular care about blood. So the leader's daughter is like their highest commodity. They are not allowed to leave. They will fight hard to keep those
yes,
girls in. Okay.
that. And so now you know what I'm up against. And I don't know how, I guess I'm going to be careful what I say there, but I don't know how dangerous they really are at this point. Okay.
Right.
So I've got this girl, and I start realizing how dangerous it is. The father, I was the dumb one that called the mother to say, she landed on my doorstep. Here's what's going on. We're going to court. And then my phone just started ringing off the hook. And I remember one time she said, let me just talk to my father, Paul Kingston, the leader. And she's out on the phone, and I get a phone call. I'm not going to say who from, but a state agency saying they're tracking her call. Hang up, pull the battery out, and get her out of there. I'm like, what? And so again, I am clueless what I'm doing. So I walk outside, and I don't want her to think I'm like, I give her privacy. I don't want her to think I'm trying to control the situation. She wants to go home. She can go home. Like, there's no one holding her against the will and for her will. And when I said the phone call that came in, she panicked. I mean, panicked. And she's like, get me out of here, get me out of here. She was just hysterical. And so we dumped the phone. We got her out of there. But we had to, it was interesting because the state initially said, you have to drop her back off. The parents had promised not to be in her life when you're dropping her off at an uncle's house. Well, what we didn't know is the 60-year-old uncle was planning to marry the 17-year-old girl. And so we had literally dropped her off at a predator's place. But the father, I guess, was around the corner. So I had to pull up in front of this Kingston home, all these people are out in the front lawn. I have no idea if I'm safe or not. I called law enforcement for backup. They were sitting on the outside of the neighborhood, but I think they thought, well, I know they thought I was pro-polygamy, like I was one of them. And so they were really rude to me at the time. And they said, we won't let you come in. I said, I'm pulling off my license plates. I'll give them to you. I'm just around the block, but I don't need them to track me. And so when I pulled up, I mean, they were very hostile. They said, drop her stuff in the middle of the road. My car was full of stuff. No one helped me. So I'm dropping it in the middle of the street. I get in my vehicle and I turn around to leave. She just grabs onto me, and she is so bad. And she's like, don't leave me here. Do not leave me here. Don't leave me here. And I'm holding her saying, love you. It's going to be okay. I'll see you in court. We still have a court hearing. And I drive off, and I'm just devastated, right? I'm devastated. And I find out that her father was around the corner, picks her up, and she used the word, I don't know the details, accosted her until 2-something in the morning. Thank God I had given her a trap phone, and I'd given her $200, and I said, put it in your bra, because they search everything. I mean, they control everything to a T. And somehow at like 2-something in the morning, she told the father that she just needed to get out and go for a walk. And so he let her walk around this park while he was right nearby. And it was dark enough that she pulled it out and called me and said, here's what's happening. They're making me go down to the courthouse tomorrow. They're making me withdraw my emancipation papers. I don't know what to do. And I said, I'll meet you at the courthouse. And so I flew down. I've never shared this story live. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not getting myself in trouble, but it was all legal. So I went down to the courthouse, and I explained to them what was happening, that she was being forced to withdraw her emancipation papers. She had called me in the night. When I went down to the courthouse, I sat down in this little waiting area, and I said, I just need to talk to whoever, she's going to be walking in here, and I need you to get her alone so you know what's really happening. Well, here she comes with her mother down the hallway, and the mother knows who I am. I've got another girl sitting next to me, and I literally lay my head on her shoulder because the mom sits across from me. There's only one tiny waiting room. I pull the hair over my face. I act like I'm sleeping. And the lady got the girl behind closed doors. I got a text on my phone that said, go through the front doors. So I get up, but in the meantime, I heard her on the phone with Paul. I heard her on the phone saying they took her back behind closed doors. I heard that people were on the way to the courthouse. I went through the doors. This poor lady, she's a single mom, I was trying to help and really understand this. And she said, I can't take this case. The Kingstons have threatened to bomb our courthouse before. We're shutting the courthouse down. We need to sneak you out the back door and get you safely away. And I'm thinking, what? I'm new. Like, I am just stay-at-home mom, right? Just trying to help make a difference. And I'm thinking, is this legal? Is this normal? But okay, wait, they're all officials telling me what steps to take. And the girl ended up running. It's a long story, ended up running. She stayed in hiding until the actual court hearing. And when we went to court that day, every head of every state agency in the state of Utah showed up, which made a statement to the Kingstons, like, you mess with Tanya, you mess with these clients, the state's going to take this seriously, and they're going to step up and they're going to do something about it. And so I feel like that was one of my saving graces. And I don't, do I worry? Yes, but I'm not going to stand down because I'm fearful of them. I'm going to do what God calls me to do that I feel is right. Again, do I make mistakes? Absolutely. But for the most part, I've got lawyers, I've got, I make sure that I'm following that line and I'm doing everything legally correct. So it's been a lot. So my kids, long term, I have one child who suffered from severe anxiety. I've never talked about this before either. My youngest child, for the first 2 weeks when we had a family in, I'll just call it what it is, adversarial stuff. Like, she would say that there was, she would use the word Satan, which we never talked about. We never talked about spiritual warfare or anything like that in our home. And she would see things for about 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of having someone in there. And we just finally taught her how to pray. We're like, okay, we could rescue her and bring her into her bed as a mom, what I wanted to do. But I just said, our God is more powerful than anything else in the world. And you just need to pray. And so like a month down the road, I said to her, hey, does this, whatever this being is still visit you? And she said, yeah, Mom, still visits, but I just pray out loud and they go away. And I thought she was like 3 or 4 years old. And I was like, unbelievable. But her faith is so strong as a believer because of that. My other one has had intense therapy to work through the anxiety. My oldest was just a tough girl. Like she's in Georgia and PA school and just rocking life and not scared of anything. And so it affected a lot. And Mom was busy a lot, right? But I really tried to make sure I did most of my work when they were at school. And then I was a mom, moving forward. I would sometimes have kids in my car, but I would always make sure they were number one priority. At least I did my best to. So
Thank you so much for like giving us such a good such a good explanation and answer to that question, because it matters. I know that's something we're concerned about. I think that the other side of that is your children grew up sacrificing to some extent, right? Sharing their space and experiencing this, but seeing that example and becoming that kind of people, like while it was hard for them, I can't even think of a better gift you could have given them than that
yeah,
example and that experience into making them amazing people.
thank you. And they're very compassionate and they all give back to their community even to this day. They're all going into the medical field and they all work down at, one of the free clinics and, are working behind the scenes doing things. They talk about doing mission trips, out to third world countries. And so they really have, I think, learned that compassion component. But I don't know if I would have ever necessarily gone down that road again due to my fear of failure and my anxiety that I dealt with on a regular basis. And so God just has a funny way of working things out. And the fear was released for me when I got terminal cancer, and it was like, wait, I'm going to see, I have the audience of one. I'm going to have to go meet him soon. And I'm really going to not do something because I'm worried what everyone else around here thinks of me. And I thought, no, I don't care anymore. And so I just went boldly forward, but we still have that now. It creeps up on you the longer you're away from facing death. But, I'm still a human being at the end of the day. So
Yeah, that's
you're alive.
that absolutely. I love seeing how God has his hands on each of us to prepare us for the next work or the next adventure, right? The next mission that we're given. And I think I think it's so easy in this day and age, especially, as a parent, to see our kids just living life for themselves, just thinking, this is what's important, this is what matters, this is what I want, this is, and to allow your children to see real, actual suffering, what like allowing your children to see what these children and these women were going through probably would help them to never be ungrateful or never, like that dose of reality is so important and
Absolutely.
beautiful for our kids.
I agree. I mean, my husband and I both grew up very poor and in very dysfunctional families. And so we knew as we chose to break that cycle and raise them in a different way, how do we not raise them to be spoiled children at the same time and overcompensate the other way? And so it's been kind of a natural balance. My husband's a really hardworking, corporate guy and still owns his farm back in Nebraska and works that as well. And so they've learned, he's made them work. He takes them back to the farm. We don't hand them things on a silver platter. If they need something, we say, what can you do around the house to earn it? And so, yeah, it's been kind of cool running a nonprofit, raising your children and that to see that they are very fortunate compared to most people in this world. And so it's been cool. Yeah, it's been cool. It's been a privilege, honestly.
That's great. I'm obviously trying to help answer the questions that people are having as they're considering, could I help? Could I step in and help? Am I in a situation where there's so much need? And it sounds to me that now in your ministry, I guess we could call it, in your work, that you spend a lot of time helping other what are they, volunteer families, like you've talked about how you're helping train them to know how to help these families coming out of polygamy. So do you spend equal times still? Do you still house your own families, and do you spend a lot of time tutoring and training other families?
Well, so honestly, right now at this time, I think we only have like 5 host families. we're not getting children dumped as much. Instead, in the FLDS, they send them to repentance homes now. And so they're not just getting rid of them. They know that they're getting a wonderful life out here, and I'm not sure they really want that. I think they want them to come back into the fold. And so we don't have as many. And then we had some generous donors purchase a 10-bedroom old polygamist home, actually crazy. And we have another house where we do the young adults. But really right now, I think our biggest need is host families like ours that have the extra basement space. Like we have probably 4 moms with just 1 or 2 children that need a safe place while they're finishing their college degrees, while they're getting intense counseling to deal with their trauma. And yes, we walk very closely with those families and meet with them on a weekly basis. If the parents are like, oh my gosh, this is the issue in the home, we don't know how to deal with it, we even allow them to sit down with our counselors and have counselors navigate those conversations, because our biggest goal is, not to have them mold into our family units, but what can we be for them in order to be successful in our environment, right? So they're going from a closed, they come out here to the competitive environment, which is completely different. They're paralyzed making decisions. So how can we equip them like we did our children to be able to take on the world, so to speak? And so that's what we do, mostly walking alongside of the families that currently have our young adults. So most of them don't have children anymore. So.
Okay. That's really helpful to understand. Man, it's so sad to see how what they do to keep their people in is really painful to understand. And I have some compassion for a lot of these women that are just like, I don't want my children. That seems like such a harsh thing for a woman to say. But when you consider that it wasn't her choice, it's like I have a large family and it's hard and exhausting and a lot of work. And if you were forced to do that with no other choice and it's not in your makeup and in your desire, we have to have compassion there too, that these women weren't wanting this life. They didn't choose it necessarily.
And I would love to sit and chew on it for just a minute, because it is so important that people understand in this culture, when a child is born, you are very aware that child is not yours. That child is the property of the church. It's God's child, and they believe their prophet hears from God, right? And so if you think, for example, one child is doing negative behaviors in the home, and the leader says, you've got to get rid of that one child for the good of the whole to be able to go to heaven, you're going to do the most loving thing you can do to save the flock as a whole, right? And so they don't want this. They love their kids. If people think that they don't, it's a lie from the pit of hell. Now, the fathers don't have as close of a relationships with their children, but again, they're on this treadmill, right? They've got their multiple families and all these children, and they've got to work to provide. And by the way, you've got to bring in so much money for the church. And oh, by the way, you have your church duties, right? And I feel like it's a way to keep them off kilter as well. And by the way, with these men and these mothers, your children make one mistake, they will tell you that is a direct reflection of you. And you could also lose your family, you could lose your community, and you could lose your salvation. And so it's just so important for people to understand really the intense dynamics. And if you and I, Michelle, were born in that same environment, it could happen to us. I don't care how bright we are. They are some of the smartest, most compassionate, wonderful people I've met. It could happen to any of us when it's all you know, and the slow systemic brainwashing that happens all along the way. So
Absolutely.
Really want your people to understand that who are listening to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And your story about them coming after your children, knowing that they can control you by threatening your children, is very much part of that community as well. That the women, if you love your child too much or let that be seen too much, you are giving them a tool to use against you, because they can hurt your child to control you and to get back at you. And if you have one child that misbehaves, you could have another child. And when I say punished, like brutalized, right? Really terrorized and brutalized. And so when like this control, that these women are just as desperate and afraid as their children are. They're not in a position to defend and protect their children necessarily while they're still in that community.
And in the FLDS not long ago, we had a whole family that left, and one of the girls who was technically an adult said, I don't want to go. So the family had been separated prior. The parents were both, it's called forever sent away. So go off in opposite directions. You're no longer married. And so this girl, the parents came to me, they found each other again. They had gotten a phone call from one of their daughters that said, we're being horrifically abused and neglected. They called me and like, we don't have the money to go rescue them. Can you go rescue them? And I said, they called you, not me. I'm the devil. They're taught on the devil. I said, I will give you a gas card. You go rescue. And so they went to get their kids, and the one girl stayed behind. And she called later on and said she was tortured, like taken out into the woods by men and tortured on behalf because the whole family left. And so then that was her next call, right? And she's like, oh my God, this is what happened to me. And the dad calls me again. Hey, I need you to go get my daughter. I said, no, I will give you the gas money. You go get your daughter. And so now they're all together, but what they have to endure, and that was the example they had to make to the rest of the community. This is what's going to happen if you grab your children and you run. And so it's absolutely such a mind-blowing thing that I don't know if I'd probably do the same thing, right? And it would be really hard not to do exactly what you're told for the sake of your children. It's the best way to say it.
Mm-hmm. And God commands it. This is not us controlling you. This is God. We speak on behalf of God. It's just tragic.
It's tragic. And where I, as the leader of my organization, there's checks and balances in place for me, as I have a board of directors who can keep me accountable and can fire me any day. Right. And so I answer to others, and they make sure that my programs are aligning with what our mission is. Whereas in these communities, you have a patriarchal society. It's one man at the top. There isn't this board of directors making sure, is he really hearing from God? And what do we compare that to? Whereas for me, if my pastor gets up and he says something, I'm like, gosh, is that true? I have written documents to go back to go, is that really of God? Okay, that's not. And I'm going to call them out on that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I
absolutely
have to compare it to. They don't. They make it up as they go along. A lot of them do, and so they listen to them. I mean, they think that they're hearing from God. And you and I know, when you have sex trafficking, child labor laws being broken, I mean, you know that's not from God, right? They don't know that. They think, oh, it's been blessed and ordained by God, so I guess we have to go off and work at the age of 8. I guess I'm going to get married at age 12. You know, they don't know any different. So they think they're the chosen.
Yes. Yeah. It's really this strange, I don't know if you're familiar with the Book of Mormon, but it actually preaches very adamantly against polygamy. And the main sermon, Jacob chapter 2, combines in that sermon pride and polygamy. And they do go together. Absolutely. We are better than everyone else. They're all going to hell. They all want to destroy you. They're all corrupt. We are the only blessed ones. So submit to us and do whatever we tell you to do. And we will abuse you in every way possible, but you can't leave. And there's not even a vehicle to stop or report abuse. Even if some leader isn't abusing, someone in the line, the dad, the brothers can be doing horrible abuse, the mothers, the sisters, and there's nothing. You just have to keep. If you say something, you're the problem. You're the one making waves. You're the one destroying the peace in the family, right? So it's always the victim's fault. Always.
It really is. I just need them to take out the Doctrine and Covenants section 132 for me.
That's my podcast. It's called 132 Problems. That's what we are dedicated to. Yep, that would be great.
I know that's the manifesto. I get it. I know there's a separation. LDS is completely different from get it. But I'm like, just take that one piece out for me. Can you do that? It would make my life so much easier trying to explain this.
Okay, talk about that more. I want to hear more about how having 132 in the Doctrine and Covenants still affects you in your work.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you have the fundamentalists, is what they want to be called fundamentalist Mormons. I refer to them as fundamentalists because I don't want to, harm or upset my LDS friends and neighbors and volunteers. But, they're the ones in the wrong, right? It's still in their Doctrine and Covenants section 132. It's ordained by God. It was a revelation. And I always say, but then there was the manifesto. And the manifesto reads, though, where you promise not to practice future plural marriages. You need to read that. I don't know if you've read that. And so they're like, so see, they weren't saying that you couldn't practice polygamy. So they justify it essentially in their head. And so when I go out and speak, it's so interesting because I do law enforcement conferences, I talk to counselors, hospitals, whatever, and I really have to make that distinction. But because it's still in the Doctrine and Covenants 132, everybody wants to talk about that. And I don't feel like I'm equipped necessarily to speak about it. I'm not LDS, and anything that I have, to say might be, taken the wrong way. And so I don't say a lot other than there's a manifesto, and it was secretly still practiced for a while. And then there was, I refer to it as the Great Divide, right? Like, they're not doing it. Now, I will say, Michelle, I think I mentioned on our preliminary conversation that there are some people that are part of the church that are practicing it quietly and secretly because they do believe, because that Doctrine and Covenant section 132, that they have to practice that in order to reach the celestial kingdom. And that's the issue, right? Because it does talk about.
So they're active members of the church, attending the temple, attending church, practicing polygamy secretly.
Yes.
And you've mentioned, quite a few people like that.
Yes, I've had lunch with them. I've had, you know what I mean? They've come to me to meet me, and I'm like, I honestly don't want to be in the middle of any kind of a divide. I think we're all going to be very surprised when we get to the other side, in heaven, of realizing who's actually there. Like, do we understand what Christ did for us? Do we understand his sacrifice? Do we understand that we fall short, and that is why he, and if we understand that, I believe there's going to be people from every walk of life. And so I really try to bring together, like, let's focus on what we have in common more than what we separate. But I get the question everywhere.
Absolutely.
I get the person in the audience go, let's talk about what this started with the LDS church. And I'm like, oh God. And I literally would go over and go, okay, who is up on the panel with me that's LDS? You get that one. He's like,
okay, so I volunteer, because I have studied this in depth. Call me in the future if you want to, and I will come and talk about, because there are some basic things, if people understand about section 132, how it never was revelation of God. It was never in the original Doctrine and Covenants. It was adding all of these little facts that you can, that's why I think God is using me this way, because I used to so strongly believe in polygamy, right? Yes. And then when you really get into it and realize nothing that Brigham Young taught, nothing that the early Mormons did had anything to do with section 132. They didn't even follow it. It doesn't follow anything that polygamists are doing now, right? There's no truth in it anywhere. And you can point out just all of the problems to make people understand 132 absolutely should not be in our scriptures.
Well,
it shouldn't be. And
I would love to learn a little bit more about that. Like, my relationship with people from the LDS culture is my human connection, right? And as humans, oh my gosh, they're some of the most dear people in my life. And so I don't know the integral, details. And I haven't really cared to know, because I don't want to get in the middle of that conversation, because you're still going to have that person out in the audience that says that's crap. And they're going to want to go to the church. And I just disengage. And I always say, you might want to call, the church and have those questions asked. I just don't want to get in the battle. I really don't. But I'm fascinated by what you just said, because I've never heard that. Never heard that.
Yeah, well, that's what this podcast is dedicated to, is to helping LDS people like me understand the history and the scriptures on this topic. And so I always, in my introductions, usually ask people to start at the beginning, just for that reason, because at the beginning episodes, I start breaking down scripture by scripture and showing how we got all of this. And, there's so much more that I could do. It never can be perfect or comprehensive, but it does make the case that I think is useful for people to understand.
So I need to know more about it, only because I wonder if, when I'm opening up and trying to explain to people why these people live polygamy, why they're so devout, and it's really quick how I brush over it, but I'm like, well, the Doctrine and Covenants section 132, blah, blah, blah. But then there was the manifesto, and then they had the Great Divide. And so I always say it starts with Joseph Smith, but then they had another, I wouldn't call it a revelation, but the manifesto. And so if I am saying that incorrectly, I need to make sure what I am representing as far as the LDS church goes is correct. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's very important for me, my integrity and everything that I share. So we'll talk offline.
And it's really tricky. Yeah, we can follow up and talk about it. But I do just want to say that, like, the standard narrative absolutely with everyone is that it started with Joseph Smith. But that's an interesting history. So I'm not asking you to like believe that Joseph didn't start it or jump on that bandwagon, but it is good to at least know the history to understand where those claims come from and why it is claimed that Joseph Smith started it, so that you could say most people believe it started with Joseph Smith, some think it started with Brigham Young. So you could even just throw that little piece in to start allowing, because like I used to, when I started out the podcast, I was just talking about what's from God, regardless of what Joseph Smith did or not. What does God want, right? And I really thought that's all that matters. But as I've gotten into it more, I've realized actually the question of Joseph Smith is important, because if Joseph Smith started polygamy, people who are LDS and have a testimony of the Book of Mormon, and it's going to be way harder for them to let go of it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Whereas
Absolutely.
when you can show, like I just did a series of episodes a little while ago on the priesthood ban and the racism in the church, and showed very distinctly how that was not Joseph Smith. It was Brigham Young and the later leaders who attributed it to Joseph Smith. And that should be something that can help people understand. Brigham Young brought a lot of problematic doctrines into the church. We already know that. Polygamy is just another one of them. And that is... Go ahead.
I want to know, what does your church think of your podcast? Are they welcoming this dialogue, or is this shut up, Michelle?
Yeah, it depends on who you're talking to. I definitely, so the very polygamist loving members have actually, some of them have actually tried to get me excommunicated. I have beautiful local leaders who know me and understand what I'm doing, who have told me that absolutely is not going to happen. So and I think that it's just a matter of I just don't like the toxic family thing where we keep the family secrets quiet. We don't talk about problems. We don't, I think it's so much more important to bring things into the open, and truth matters more than loyalty to a lie, right? Loyalty matters, but not loyalty to a lie. And so I think that, and there's definitely, it's in everybody's interest to think that Joseph is a polygamist. That's the most controversial thing I've said, is when I did that deep study and came to go, oh my gosh, Joseph wasn't a polygamist. And now the more I've studied it, the more absolutely I know that. Do you know what I mean? The more convinced I have become of it. And so that's the most controversial thing that I have said. But I think there was a point I was going to make about that. Let me remember what it was. Well, I lost it. There was a reason I was going there. But I think that the reason, like I said, the reason it matters is because we shouldn't falsely attribute. Sorry, go ahead. There was a point I was going to make, and I'll get back to it. But what was the question I was answering?
No, I just wondered the fallout from
yeah. So that's the main thing, that people just I lose credibility with that perspective. That's what I was going to say. It's in everybody's interest to claim Joseph was a polygamist. The LDS Church wants to have Joseph as a polygamist because they think that affects their line of authority, where, you know what I mean? It had to have come from Joseph Smith, where I think, look at how many things of Brigham's we've dropped. We've dropped blood atonement. We've dropped the racial teachings. We've dropped the Adam God theory. We've every one of Brigham's doctrines, we have disavowed and rejected. It doesn't hurt us to add polygamy to that list, right? But the LDS Church is committed to have polygamy be from Joseph. The fundamentalists absolutely are. Those who have left the church or are hostile to the church, anyone who's anti-Mormon, it's in their best interest to have Joseph be a polygamist, because that's the main thing they have against him, are these claims he was sleeping with 14-year-old girls. But when you start to understand just a few things, like, for example, the earliest claims we have of Joseph's polygamy start in 1869. Joseph was killed in 1844. So a full 15 years later, when Brigham had them here steeping, the leaders had them here being trained to tell what they had to tell, to say what they had to say.
Do you know Carolyn Pearson at all?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I've had her on the podcast.
I was going to say, because I go to LDS activities occasionally with friends, and I went to it was so long ago, night, and they knew what I did, and they're like, you need to come hear this one. I believe it was her speaking. And then she spoke 2 doors down from me, and accidentally some lady came to my door, and was like, is this where Carolyn Pearson is? I'm like, no, she's 2 doors down. And they were like, why don't you have numbers on your house? I said, well, I help people out of polygamy. They don't really like me. And she was like, grabs my hand and goes, you have to come down to this house and hear what Carolyn, and she was talking about her book, The Ghost of Polygamy.
The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy.
Okay, Ghost of Eternal Polygamy. But I wonder, like, and they were reading out of journals. Maybe it wasn't her, but they were reading journals way back in the 1800s of people who lived polygamy. And I just wondered, like, again, I assumed based off of that night, they were relating it all to Joseph Smith at the time, and then talked about how they had flowed away from it. And I just found it interesting and fascinating. So I didn't know.
And just one thing I want to clarify, we call them journals. We call them journals. There's not a single journal. They're reminiscences. They're writing as older women about those years. We have not a single bit of evidence of anybody, like even the day they were supposedly married, there's nothing in their journal. There's nothing in it was, and you know how polygamists are trained to say what they need to say. God wants you to say this.
Totally.
They're so controlled that the fact that all of these, like the fact that all of these, that there are these claims of women much later in life under the control of the church. I mean, we think polygamists are kind of desperate and hopeless now. Imagine being in Utah, like you were so isolated. There was no hope, and it was a death sentence, you know? And so, and you were trying desperately to have your needs met, have God approve of you, like you were desperate to do what you needed to do. So we shouldn't be that shocked that women were willing to make these claims when they were told to by the church leaders. So it's just something to consider. I know it's a really controversial topic, but I think that here's what's interesting. The more access we get to documents and to history, the stronger the case becomes for Joseph's innocence, the weaker the case becomes for his guilt. Like even all of these claims that Brigham Young made, that Emma tried to kill him, that she was the most wicked woman, that he was betraying her constantly. You can read the letters between Joseph and Emma.
And I will say, if that's true, right? Again, I don't know. But if that is true, you understand, and hopefully your followers understand, one of the number one reasons people are leaving the church is over this topic of polygamy. I get a ton of people volunteer here. And if that was resolved, and that was what you said it was, that might change everything for the LDS folks. Just saying.
You're absolutely right. And I do also want to clarify that a lot of people will say, see, you want to believe this. Like, this is not motivated reasoning for me at all. I was very content to have Joseph be a polygamist. That's what I thought forever until I started getting in and doing the research. And, if you care to engage with the podcast, you'll see some of what I've learned, but the case is compelling and becoming more and more so every day. It's just that people like Carolyn, I didn't talk to her about it at all. She, before the interview, found out that I had said that I didn't know if Joseph was a polygamist. I thought he wasn't. I hadn't been convinced yet. And she wanted to cancel the interview. She was so offended we worked it out and resolved it and had a good discussion. But people are very committed to, he's the bad guy, and Brigham was just carrying on what Joseph did. And I think that actually Brigham Young needs to be accountable for what he did. We can't let him just be following in the footsteps of Joseph Smith, because he is the one that did this. If that makes sense. Like, he did a lot of negative things. So that's what. Go ahead.
I was remembered when we were first talking. So you were like, what are you scared of, Tanya? What are you scared of? And I'm like, can I ask, are you LDS? Like, with everything that you're doing, you're like, oh, I am. I'm devout. And I was like, okay, she's safe. Like, I was trying to make sure this wasn't a Mormon bashing conversation.
Right.
That I didn't
Absolutely.
want to make. And so I really do appreciate how you navigate things and you're looking for truth. I tell people that if my church wasn't open to that, I wouldn't be there, because I had my husband's so analytical and so many questions. My kids are bright. They've had so many questions. And I just believe it brings me closer to the Savior, right? It just brings me to my relationship when I get, that's it. Okay, I get it now. So
that's exactly. I think that our testimony in the Book of Mormon, like the Book of Mormon itself, condemns us for not paying attention to what it says, for not believing it and listening to it. And isn't it interesting that we ignore everything it says about polygamy because of these it also warns us of the false traditions that are handed down. So we are living out, like everything we're experiencing is further confirmation of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon for me. It's really interesting to see that happen. So speaking of the church, and I really am, I was thankful that you are careful to not bash the church. I love my church and I'm quite defensive of it,
No, I can tell. And I'm really glad to hear that. I just didn't want to line with somebody that was on, I will never do the Mormon bashing thing. It's not my heart. I love the people. I have so many friends in it. It's just not my thing. So.
And see, I so appreciate that. Thank you. Like for coming and doing the work and not letting your heart get turned against, Mormons and polygamists. Like your love is just beautiful to experience. So thank you. I am curious.
Me, so it goes both ways. You're accepting me. So we're good.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. When I spoke with Flora Jessup, she has been in this work for a long time. She's feisty and great. And she was so frustrated by the systems, how she felt like they were not adequate to help in this very unique situation of polygamy. Like, for example, them returning the girl to the Kingstons. That's just tragic, right?
Yeah.
And so I have that question. And then, so I don't forget it, I also want to talk about, she also expressed frustration that the church, she felt like she was working against the church and they weren't helping. But you said that actually the church has started to help. And so would you mind talking about those? You can talk about the church first and then the sort of the system if you want to.
Yeah, I think I think they all knew I probably wasn't LDS way back when. And I think they watched me for a long while to see if I was going to blame them for what's going on today. And, they have since probably about 5 years ago, I want to say, they give us a grant. They help us with, bishop storehouse orders and DI vouchers. We have very good relationships with the humanitarian division. I think it's technically the North American Humanitarian Division. And they also volunteer with us. So we have Eagles before you all left the Boy Scouts. I would say whenever that whole thing fell out, we had groups here all the time. We had Relief Society events all the time. They would do drives for us. I feel like we have a very good relationship with the church and a lot of our volunteers. We've had people work here that are LDS. And so I think the system as a whole, sometimes I feel like does fail to protect these folks, but I don't think it's because they don't want to. I think it's because they don't have enough proof, concrete proof and evidence to be able to say, no, we're not going to do this. It's interesting as of late because I think maybe you saw the press conference where a whole bunch of women got up there and said, my children are missing. And it's been very interesting because we have pro bono attorneys. So our attorneys will take on one of these people, they will go to court, and they've been citing more and more based on the latest revelations that have come out from the FLDS, stating that to consecrate the children back to the church, that they're going to die within 5 years and become translated beings. And so I think because of that evidence, the judge has been given more tools to work with to say, okay, we are going to give an emergency order to get those kids returned back to the home. And so, it's just hard to know. So like, I never want to badmouth, like, for example, law enforcement. They're doing the best they can with the information that they're given. They're also overworked and underpaid. They have all kinds of issues in our community. And it's not that they don't want to help. I will say I've run across very few, some that because of the topic of polygamy, they also don't want to engage because it's in the history. And, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. I'm like, okay, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about polygamy. We're talking about abuses that are happening. We try to remain neutral on the topic of polygamy. And so, yeah, I understand her concern because it's been very frustrating with me. And that's why we've developed our own team and our way of working around the system here in Utah legally. We do it by the book in order to get the kids the care that they need. So my first conversation is always calling the parent. And I have compassion for those parents. So I'll say, hey, Junior just landed on my doorstep and he does not want to go back home. And I know immediately whether they're going to be amenable to work with or not. And if they say he's my kid and I'm coming to get him, I'm like, you're absolutely right. He's your child and you have every right to your child. I just need you to know that if your child refuses to go like he's refusing right now, then I'm going to have to call in the state of Utah. I'll have to make file a police report, and, DCFS will be called in. And it's really interesting because some will say, fine, I'm still coming to get my kid. And if they haven't abused their child, then they have every right to their child, right? If they've abused their child, almost instantly they're like, what do you need us to do? I'm like, I just want to invite you into the process. Like, I want you to be in your child's life. I want healing to occur. I want you to pick this host family that they're going to live with. I want you to decide on the school they're going to attend. I want you to be a part of your child's life. And they will come down, and I'll put them up in hotels and they engage in the conversation. And I respect them as that. They're the parent, right? And so that's kind of how we've gotten around so-called the system. And just depending on what we know, I mean, if they're abused, I have to report it. I mean, there's no way to get around it, but we have the situation already, and the parents have signed documents saying they're good, guardianship, this family can have guardianship, then we keep them out of the system and going into the foster care part of this. And so, which can be really harmful to them. So I kind of jumped around, but I hope that's quasi answered. But I understand Flora's frustration. It's been the same frustration over the years. The more I engage law enforcement, the more I talk to the Attorney General's office and the FBI, the more I understand how difficult of a situation that they're in to actually do something. We got to empower them to do it, right?
Right. Okay. So that's so interesting because some of the polygamists are so tricky and sneaky and learn how to work every channel, right? And so in a way, decriminalizing polygamy, because that's where my heart is. I'm like, let's not persecute people for their religion. But at the same time, it makes it tricky because abuse is hard to do. I've always really disliked DCFS and kind of hated it. I was a homeschool mom of a big family, and I know that it's not good to feel under threat, And
Right.
so, but this is such the opposite side where it's interesting because is an arranged marriage for an 18-year-old considered abuse? Do you know what I mean? There are so many tricky things. So it's almost like decriminalizing it made it harder to help people and sort of empowered them.
And so now I'm accused of, so 3 years ago when the decriminalization was on the table, I knew that a certain organization had worked behind the scenes for an entire year to get everybody on board. But I had clients calling me going, do you know what's going to happen when they decriminalize? And I'm like, I'll go down and make my 2-minute statement, on behalf of my clients who aren't brave enough to stand up. And I got accused at that point that I'm, against polygamy. And I was like, that's not what I said. When I was up there, I said, if you don't deal with the crimes within polygamy, you're going to embolden these perpetrators, and every crazy is going to come out of the word work, essentially. And that is exactly what has happened over the last 3 years. It's been an absolute nightmare. And of course, they're not going to look at it. I sent Deidre Henderson, hey, do you want to talk about what's happening? Never even got a response. And I'm like, of course, they got it passed. They got whatever they wanted out of it. In the meantime, I have children being trafficked for labor and, sexual purposes, and kids are vanishing, and, fraud's going on more than it ever has. And I'm like, wake up, we have to do something about this. And so it's difficult. I know, well, I was going to say we have a meeting with somebody, but I'm not going to say who, but in law enforcement, to really talk about this issue. And if it's a part where they don't have the manpower to help find all these kids, then let us start a division, and let them be trained under this, area of law of what to do and not to do. And no one ever engages. If they find these children, then they partner with law enforcement who actually goes in and gets the kids released. Like, we have to do something, because in 5 years, they're going to be drinking the Kool-Aid, and they will drink that Kool-Aid, I promise you, because they think become celestial beings. And then we're going to have these devastated moms going, why didn't the state of Utah step up and do anything? We have the ability to do something more right now. And so that's going to be my plea moving forward in the next couple of weeks. I've got a meeting that I'm really hoping will, because I want to work alongside of them. I think they have a very tough job, and I think they're doing the best they can with what they've got. And so how can we do even better? And how can our agency help them do better? Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with your statement about, like, I can't imagine being a mother wanting my children knowing that they are experiencing extreme parental alienation. That's parental alienation is something that's become more in the topic in the world with divorce and but when you, like, polygamists do it like nobody else, because those children are being taught your mother is filled with demons. She's evil. If she's nice to you, it's because Satan wants to deceive you by pretending to be nice. The way that these children are trained to despise and distrust not only the outside world, but particularly the apostates and particularly their mother, is so destructive to them. And yet that's what they are absolutely experiencing day in and day out. And that's why they get so, when you see firsthand the way that kids who have experienced this treat their parent, it's terrifying. And what that does to a kid, I can't even imagine.
And the best statement, and I'm going to blow this, and is have you ever read the book The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk? Okay. There's a paragraph that discusses what happens. And essentially, when a caregiver is emotionally absent, consistent, violent, neglectful, they form this insecure attachment pattern where they can't trust that the external environment is going to provide any kind of relief. And when that stress gets so intense is when they have this severe anger, when they have the longings to be taken care of, but they disassociate because they can't handle it, or they have self-defeating aggression, where our kids may grow up with a secure attachment pattern of we're secure, we're seen, can't think of all the words, even soothed.
We're powerful, we matter. Like,
right. And politically, they're emotionally isolated. They have to learn to comfort themselves. Others are not safe and they're insecure. That's what we're doing to these children. And it's, again, we're keeping them off kilter. So they're like, okay, if I just follow over here, I'll be okay. And it's, as I often describe this, it's the perfect storm, right? You've got the patriarchal society, the one-man rule. What he says is from God and you've got to obey. You've got a closed community, so you don't know really what's on the outside, whether all this is true or not. You have no checks and balances in place. You've got fear of outsiders. You have to live the plural lifestyle, at least 3 wives to reach the celestial kingdom, and I believe 6 wives in order to have your own planet. The more you suffer on earth, the more blessings you're going to have in the eternal life. Like, they'll suffer a lot through abusive marriages and rapes and all kinds of things because they know this is a flicker and the rest of eternity is, forever and ever. They believe the prophet hears from God, and then, anything negative in your family, there's such severe consequences that you really logically do not have a choice but to obey. And so we're messing with these kids long term. And that's why if they don't get in a healthy environment right from the get-go, they're in drugs, sex, and alcohol, all that self-defeating aggression, because they have no hope. We're seeing a suicide at least 1 every 6 months right now for people that flee from that community. I think in 15 years, our agency, we've been able to keep it from happening, but we've probably seen 3, but it's when they've said, you know what, we're good now. We're going to go off on our own. A couple of years later, they take their lives. And so it's just heartbreaking. And how do we as a society wake up and try to do something more to make a difference so they do have hope? They see that there is unconditional love in people that care about them, and there aren't all these expectations, right? And that's what the ultimate goal should be. It's not about polygamy. It's about the abuses that are happening within polygamy. And the structure that has been set up under this guise of polygamy and religion to abuse these people. Power, sex, money, control. How do we stop it?
Absolutely. Okay, man, it's hard to hear. It's hard to hear that it's getting worse. Here it's 2020, and now we're going the wrong direction. It's just like, it's unbelievable to know that. I mean, this really is slavery. Like, there's no, sex trafficking, child trafficking, slavery. Like they have nothing on us, and we've put all of these efforts into preventing suicide in other areas with other issues, and yet this is completely ignored and empowered and emboldened. And excused away because we have this uncomfortable relationship with it, where they're kind of doing what we're supposed to be doing because we still have 132. We haven't disavowed the teachings. And and even when you start getting in and learning what these people are taught, how racist their views are, because they believe all of the Brigham doctrine, how, like we think it's bad if parents won't accept their LGBT children, like, then we've got to look at polygamy, because they're not even in the same universe of what those children are forced to do and accept.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And Michelle, I do have to say that maybe this is the mess before it does level out. And what they did, on Capitol Hill by decriminalizing it, well, it's the same as a traffic ticket. It might work out. The whole premise was maybe they'll come out of the shadows and they'll have relationships with us. And I was trying to explain, no. Part of the control is keeping them in the shadows. Like, that's not going to work. I could be wrong. When I left that hearing, I was like, maybe I'm wrong. Like, I really believe like maybe I'm wrong. And the last 3 years, I'm just like, if somebody would have just stepped up and listened. It's not okay for 12-year-old girls to be taken and raped and trapped. Like, it's just not okay.
No. And the leaders don't want connection. It's not, we've got to look at these leaders almost as mob bosses, right? Like, they parade the women who are willing to lie, like all of the women in the Warren Jeffs raid lied. Those weren't their children. Those had been taken from other families. They lie like they need to, like I believe our ancestors were forced to do, right? What we really need to look at are these leaders who are the mob bosses, who are just using this, and they love nothing more than to not be prosecuted. They're certainly not going to let their people mingle with society, because that gives them an easy out, which is not what they want for them. They have to have the control. Abusers isolate. They rely on isolation.
Yes. Lying,
and they are abusers.
Is taught. Lying for the Lord is taught, and they believe that it is justified by God. That's the reality. So if your leader says lie, I remember one of the Kingston girls saying, she was helping me with, she was on the panel of a law enforcement conference I was doing, and she said, I was taught at a very early age, I remember being 5, them saying, if a social worker comes to the door and has a gun to your head, you answer them nothing. If they say, tell me or else, you answer them nothing and you let them shoot you. This is how these children are growing.
Which also is teaching them that a social worker is going to put a gun to their head and shoot them. It's establishing the fear of the social worker and the depth of the commitment to the lie.
Well, it's interesting because something you may not know is there's apostates and there's what's called bitter apostates. And the bitter apostates, there's a level. And the bitter apostates, there's no hope whatsoever. And they are the ones that go and talk to law enforcement. They go to media. They go to an agency like mine. So there is a worse level. It's really interesting in polygamy because it really is a caste system. I don't know if you know that it's a caste system. If you're a Jeffs, Kingston, man, you are the cream of the crop, and you have the pure blood of Jesus Christ flowing through your veins. But if you have a beautiful daughter that's at the bottom of the totem pole, and that daughter can marry into the Kingston, lineage, then the whole family gets to move up through the ladder, so to speak. Like, it's just a really sad, weird system that is set up. And I don't remember where I was going with that. But anyway, great conversations, Michelle. What are their questions? And we could probably talk forever, but
I do want to know, I just want you to let us know what help you need and how, like all of us, our lives are full. We're all doing, but I hope that people will just open up to saying, Lord, is there some way you can use me in this? Do you, and the inspiration comes with the Lord telling you, you can do this, you can do this, you have, or talk to this person who maybe is just like someone talked to you and asked you to help. So tell us what help you need and how people can help, how they can donate or what other help they can offer.
So I will say the very first thing is obviously prayer is great. I mean, like, where do we need to go next? But talk to your state representatives, please. Talk to them, fill them in on the realities of what is going on. And if you have a basement apartment, we have 4 moms in need. If you want to donate financially so they can rent a place, you can donate at holdingouthelp.org. There's a donate button. we are in desperate need of a counselor. So if you have any counselors that we can train on our end that can donate, 10 hours a week or even 5 hours a week, or say I can take 2 clients on full time, anything like that is helpful. If you're an accountant and you say you can come in and do trainings to teach them how to do their own taxes, like you'd be so surprised at, you might have the exact skill set that even one client needs and make a massive difference for them. So I would say those are probably my main things. Talk to people, let them know what they've heard on the podcast, invite people into dialogue, spread the word, spread the word, spread the word. We need help. So.
That's excellent. So I've for a long time been feeling I want to call for a day of fasting and prayer, just for our polygamous brothers and sisters. So maybe we can work together and try to organize something in our religious communities and just let there be try to invoke our faith on behalf of these people to have God help us. Well, not, do you know what I mean? That we can ask God to help these people that need help to right the wrongs of our ancestors. It's really, really a heavy weight that we bear. And so,
even something like that would be, honestly, it would be massive. It would be massive. So, anything you can think of, Michelle,
okay. Well, then let's connect, and I'll invite a few other people that are, and let's plan that. Let's commit to it right now, and we'll put something together. Is that all right?
Right now.
There we go. So everyone can look forward to that and keep us honest. So, Tanya, I am just overwhelmed. I'm so amazed and thankful with the amazing work you do. And you're such a beautiful person. Thank you for coming and talking to me and sharing this. And of course, your website will be linked in the description box so people can go look at it. There are stories, there's a blog, there's a lot more information you can find on that. You can find out how to donate and how to contact and get in touch with Tanya if you know people who need help, or if you are in a position to offer any sort of help. I know that this really is kind of the blood and sins of our generation. We kind of are all carrying the weight of this to some extent. And if there's something we can do to help, then that is a beautiful thing.
If we call ourselves followers of Christ, then how can we serve in some way, right? How can we make a difference? And so we have quite a few LDS homes that have stepped up as well, but we need more. So just know, though,
Absolutely.
If you do step up, you can't have the ulterior motive of trying to convert. It's in our training to not push religion at all. But if somebody has a space, we would welcome it, and we'd be so grateful to have that space. So yeah, we just appreciate you bringing awareness. We really do, Michelle. It's amazing to be able to be on this platform and to get to share in front of hopefully thousands. And if there's anything that you need from me or we need to re-engage, let me know. Would love it.
Perfect. Okay, we'll be in touch. Please, everybody listening, share this episode. Let's help spread the word and help these people. It's such important work. So, okay, thank you, Tanya. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Michelle. Have a great day.
This was such an eye-opening interview in so many ways. I hope that you learned a lot, and I really hope that many of you feel the same desire that I do to try to help to see what we can do. First, I do again just want to invite everybody to start to pray for these people and for this issue, that people can come to truth, and also what we can do to help. I wanted to make a big announcement, but we're still working out some of the details. But I do want to let you know that we are officially setting aside July 23rd. It's a Sunday right before the 24th of July, so it's very symbolically important. But we are inviting anybody who feels so inclined to join us on July 23rd for a day of fasting and prayer to just try to help these people who are trapped, their families are being separated still. They are being taught these ideas. I hope you really understood what she was saying about mothers who leave and they're not able to get their children. And within just a little bit of time, their children are fully convinced of how wicked their mother is. And they stay when, if those mothers feel so strongly, if they could get their children out sooner, they could save them. There are so many things happening that we just need God's help in. These are hard problems. I am not at all for persecution or prosecution of families or people living their faith. And at the same time, when children are being taught these horrible things, it is just really hard and really sad. So the only thing I need to do, know to do, is to seek God's wisdom and help and direction. So anyone who feels to join us, please do. We'll have more information coming forward. Anyone who feels inclined to help, maybe put an event together. That's what we would like to be working on. Please let me know. And also, there will be links in the descriptions below for ways that you can contact your representatives to let them know if you feel like sending them this interview or giving them Tanya's information so she can talk to them. Also, Tanya said there's a real need for things like gas cards and just basic things. So there will be a lot of information in the description box below for anybody who feels inclined to start seeing how they can help. And then, of course, anything that you feel inspired to do or that's your own creativity, share with us your ideas, because these are our brothers and sisters. I loved also Tanya's insight about just being kind, just smiling and being welcoming and trying to reduce some of that fear that they are taught so that they do feel a little more empowered, that they have options. So thank you again for joining us and for joining us going forward in these exciting things to hope that we can be an instrument in the hands of God in some small way. So I will see you next time.